Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Move People podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Barlow, and today I have the really special opportunity to speak with a woman who has been a leader in conservative politics, both at the state and national level, and for a long time, and had a really remarkable influence throughout her life. You know, some might even argue that she's kind of like Zelig, the Woody Allen character in the movie of the same name, where he just seemed to show up in all the pictures with all the people at all these unique points in history. So it's my honor to welcome Peggy Venable. Hi, Peggy. How are you?
Hi, so great to be with you. And what a generous introduction. Thank you so much. It's a nice way of saying I'm old and been around a long time.
Well, you know, as a bit of backstory, I really didn't get into the realm of politics until about 2007 when I went to work for Governor Perry. But as instantly as one steps into the Capitol, the name Peggy Venable is heard. In conversations, it's like, does Peggy know? Have we talked to Peggy? You know, what are her folks thinking? So there's no question that you have had a pretty strong influence and just an involvement over the years. And so I'd love to just talk a little bit about kind of where that started, how and where you got involved. So were you born in a political family, or how did you come to this?
You know, I wasn't. I came from West Texas, Midland, Odessa. My dad was in the oil field equipment business. So when the oil business was doing well, he was. And when it was not, he was not. So it was bust and boom back then, so to speak. Went to Odessa Permian High School, Mojo Mighty Panthers, then went off to college. And that's really where I got first engaged in politics and public policy, I think, in part working for the school newspaper. I was a political science and journalism double major and first edited my junior college newspaper. I went to junior college my first year there at Odessa, a junior college, and then went to Texas Tech for a year, and then transferred to Southwest Texas State, as it was known at the time.
Go Bobcats.
Now Texas State University, exactly.
Yeah.
So was working for the newspaper there at Texas State University, and I was the news editor, and also freelancing for the San Antonio then Times, and boy, I'm really dating myself. And also was county editor of the Hays County Citizen, a very liberal small town paper. But by virtue of that, I traveled to all of the city council meetings, and I covered the county commissioner's court, the school board meetings, and learned a lot about local politics. You know, you get a good feel for it when the secretary comes in with homemade brownies, or are they store-bought cookies? You kind of have an idea of what that meeting's going to go like. And a lot of it was, you know, whose dog was turning the trash cans over. But a lot of it, too, really was the precipitous for my being engaged in local government issues and caring about those. And then, of course, in college, a friend and I came up with the bright idea that we would write a story about the LaGrange Chicken Ranch, the infamous brothel that everyone knew about. And I think what fascinated me most about it was I was not trying to write a story about the morals of it, but simply the fact that not just local government there in LaGrange, but everyone in Texas knew it existed. And of course it wasn't legal. So to me, it was more interesting to try to figure out how can we decide which laws we are going to enforce and which ones we aren't. And where does that come down in government at the local level and then also at the state level? So we wrote the first story. It was supposed to be a 3-part series. We wrote the first story, and I guess I was a little bit surprised that the school newspaper sponsor let it in the University Star, because we thought, well, we'll just sell it to one of the other papers if it doesn't get in the University Star. And it got a lot of notoriety.
Wow.
The article did, but so did we by virtue of it. And I think the one thing I remember most was getting bricks thrown through my windows of my house there in San Marcos. And I think a lot of them were probably A&M boys that were just a little upset because it shut down quietly. Then it opened again, and that's when Marvin Zindler came in and did his piece on it. So I think that my co-author was always upset with the fact that Marvin Zindler got so much credit for it. By then I'd moved to D.C. and it didn't really matter to me, but he really enjoyed having a heyday with that.
Oh, absolutely.
So to me, it was an interesting issue, but I learned a lot from that, and really learned that the local citizens, let's face it, it was not just an innocent little business, that ministers were run out of town. They threatened their families were threatened, and it was
a criminal
serious
enterprise.
Business. Exactly. It was a serious business. So I think that, as a matter of fact, a minister told us, you can park 2 blocks from my home after dark, come to my house, and I will tell you more about it. And they were that afraid. One person told me that we needed to leave town or we'd find ourselves locked in jail and no one would ever know what happened to us.
Wow.
And so I think back then I was too naive to realize that whether it was organized crime or a syndicate or whatever, that there really were interests that wanted to make sure that stayed open, and they weren't too happy to see.
Because to watch the movie, it seems like this
all
innocent
fun and
Dolly
games.
Parton fun and games
Exactly.
kind of thing, and there really was a very seamy underbelly.
Interestingly, I never watched the movie. Just didn't really find an interest in that. But it was an interesting experience. So in the interim, I had graduated from college and went to Waco and worked for Texas Tech Technical Institute, and really was interested in making sure that people had the skills to go to work. Many of the students there were college graduates and just couldn't get a job at the time, and would go to school there for biomedical technology or laser electro-optics or some of the newer, more technical skills. But it also was a vocational school and had 1-year auto mechanics and courses like that too. And in the course of that, Gerald Ford was coming to Waco, and someone at the Chamber of Commerce recommended that I do his media credentialing. So I took a week off of work, just a vacation, and did that, and then got invited to work on the Ford campaign.
Really?
So I got involved in a rather strange way, but soon realized I was working for the wrong guy. And I'm a Ronald Reagan enthusiast, and he is my political hero. So ultimately, then back in 1980, I worked on his campaign here in Austin. That was back when Governor Clements was chairman of the campaign. Rick Shelby was the campaign director, and the offices were in the old funeral home. They're near the Capitol. It's no longer there. But I can remember at night the stairs creaking, and those of us that would be working.
Well, it's supposed to be haunted.
Yes,
Isn't
it
it?
was.
Yeah.
I think it was. Well, but that's when Carl Rove was working there. So he haunted it too.
Right.
Carl Rove was doing the caging, and he had the downstairs. So it was an interesting time to be on the campaign and here in Austin. But following that, I was really eager to go to work in the administration. So I went to Washington in 1981. I was the first White House liaison for the U.S. Department of Education.
Okay.
And gave me a chance to get some folks on some boards and commissions, and people I employed there as political appointees that helped shape education policy.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was basically the 80 election, and then throughout his tenure. Were you in D.C. for both his terms?
I was in D.C. for both his terms and worked for George Herbert Walker Bush at the Department of Interior as his White House liaison. And then got to run a campaign called Take Pride in America, which was a tremendous effort.
Yeah.
Had numerous, I think it was then 8 federal agencies engaged. And we had Lou Gossett Jr. and
I think I remember those commercials.
yes, we had some great commercials back then. You're probably too young to remember those.
I'm
I
not
would
that
think.
young.
But it was Clint Eastwood, Lou Gossett Jr., and Charles Bronson. They were our national campaign spokesmen. And later we did a special series of public service announcements for younger people, and we had the puppet Alf.
Sure.
It was popular at the time, and he went on location to shoot some public service announcements for us.
Yeah. Man, those are some 70s and 80s archetypes right there. with Alf and all those movie stars. So
That's right.
What brought you back to Texas then?
Well, the election of President Clinton.
Right, exactly.
I was then gainfully unemployed in D.C. And of course, I went to D.C. telling everyone, oh, I'm just going to be here 2 years. And then another job would be offered to me. And I never looked for a job in D.C. I always thought I was coming home after 2 years. Ended up having my daughter there. So it was the best opportunity to come back and raise my daughter a good Texan. So came back to Texas, gainfully unemployed, and I just kind of traveled that summer, had a great summer, and then thought, where do I want to live? And I thought Austin is where I wanted to live. So I actually moved here without knowing what I was going to do, but just thought it was a great adventure. So I was lucky that Citizens for a Sound Economy, the predecessor to Americans for Prosperity, was looking for a state director. And I was offered the job. So that was 20 years ago. Yeah. A little over 20 years ago.
Yeah. Were your folks at all political? I mean, did you grow up in that kind of an environment where they were engaged at all? Or
they were interested. Always voted. My mother would volunteer, but were they really? They weren't officers in the party and didn't live and breathe politics. So it was. My parents were always wondering, when was I going to get a real job?
Right.
That
Exactly.
was what they were wondering. What was I really going to do?
Yeah. You talk to a lot of folks who are in the political arena, and they kind of talk about, a lot of them grew up in homes where their parents were Democrats, and honestly, by the definitions just continue to shift, and that there's always kind of been this kind of, for lack of a better word, kind of a moderate conservative center, largely conservative center in terms of both, social values and fiscal policy. And really, it's almost like there's this line of demarcation that moves back and forth. It's kind of the definition of what is a conservative and what is a liberal kind of shift around.
Which changed dramatically in Texas. When I first went to Washington, you could have, even in college, the Republican Party could have met in a phone booth. It was, there was really no one that voted in the Republican primary because candidates weren't running there. So even though I did come back to Texas in '84, I spent a lot of time here because of the Republican convention. When I really moved back to Texas, I was so surprised and pleased to see how vibrant the party was. And not that I didn't run into Norm Newton, on airplanes, and he would bring out his maps and show me who, where the Republican Party was winning and what he was doing. But it was a really pleasant surprise to come back and see just how Texas had grown. I mean, let's face it, most of the really conservative Republicans had been Democrats at one time. Then there were people like Ernie Angelo, who my mother always said, oh, I wish we had a mayor like Ernie Angelo here in Odessa, because by that time we had moved to Odessa. And so my parents were definitely conservative, though they weren't as politically engaged. They were conservative and paid a lot of attention. But things really changed, and the party grew, but we had more conservative Democrats earlier on. And those conservative Democrats, you heard say, the party left me, I didn't leave the party, as they moved to the Republican.
Something Rick Perry has said before.
Exactly. Exactly.
Because this is, to connect it a little bit, if you happen to watch Eva Longoria, who spoke at the Democratic convention this week, she talked about the fact that, my family's been here for generations, and that, we never moved. It was just the borderline moved. And so the definition of what literally was Texas and what literally was the United States, changed from one day to the next. And I do have that sense that those lines do move. Those lines of definition and demarcation between the parties move a little bit. And I'm wondering, in this day and age, with the way that, some people refer to it as a pendulum, and I really see it more as a line on a map. And, it seems to me that the line is shifting, and that the Republican Party is in the process of shrinking, is my sense. I don't know if I couldn't say, here's voter turnout, here's whatever, but I get a sense that, as in a way, the Republican party itself has been broken into smaller and smaller factions, that then more and more of those factions are going to kind of be these little breakaway republics, and they're potentially going to either reform on the other side and join up, as that line of demarcation shifts, or they're going to form their own nation state. That's something nobody's seen before. I don't know if that's what do you think about that as a theory?
Well, I'm a pendulum person myself. I understand what you're saying about the line of demarcation moving. It certainly is. I'm hoping that is a pendulum swinging. But I think that with the nomination of Donald Trump, we are seeing either the Republican Party grow the big tent or will it fraction off into subgroups. And we've seen certainly libertarians have found shelter in the Republican Party, and yet many of them have voted for the presidential candidate, libertarian. And I think that Republicans have been so disengaged or disenchanted by the nominees, the last few nominees, presidential nominees, that if we're looking for another Ronald Reagan, we need to stop looking.
Yeah.
We're not going to see another Ronald Reagan in our lifetimes. So I think that the Republican Party is now in what I would call a creative destruction period. It's painful.
Yeah.
But anything that's going to grow and change has to go through that. So I think what will be interesting is to see where it comes out. But I think it's up to leaders in the party and outside who want to see change, helping shape just how it does work itself out. I won't try to look into a crystal ball and predict that, but certainly there's a dramatic change and shift taking place.
So you've seen this before. You've seen that pendulum swing in the other direction.
I have.
So is history repeating itself? I mean, a pendulum is a repeating motion, so.
I think it will. I think that to a large extent it will, but it will never be exactly the same. It shouldn't be.
Right.
Why should we want that? And yet, I think so many of us have such great respect for Ted Cruz, who stood up at the Republican convention and talked about the Republican principles, which really are Founding Fathers' principles, that the Democrat Party, I think, has really walked away from. And I hope the Republican Party doesn't, because I'm one of those that believe our Founding Fathers had such infinite wisdom, much more than we collectively do today.
Right.
And this is an experiment. This country truly is an experiment. Unlike President Obama, I believe it is exceptional. And I believe in American exceptionalism.
Right. Right.
So I think it's up to us to fight for it. It's one thing I've always done, whether at CSE or AFP or even before that, is realize that we have what we have because people were willing to risk their lives and fought and died for it, for us to have freedom. So I think it's really incumbent on us to fight for it. And different people have different perspectives of what that would mean and what they envision it looking like.
Right.
And I think that public discourse is always better when people with varying views are engaged. Right. I would hope honorably and honestly. Right. But it is a dynamic time in politics now.
So, one of the things to that end, it's that whole note. I think as a person, matures and goes through life, you start to learn to pick your battles, and you start to figure out this one is worth taking a punch in the nose for. This one isn't. So, if you were to kind of lay out, here are really the non-negotiables of the conservative orthodoxy for you. Right. Would you say there's a couple of things that are just like, these are bedrock? Some of these other ones we can fight about. Right. We can fight about, bathrooms. We can fight about, school funding. But when at the end of the day, there's a couple of keystone, foundational elements that are really have to be in place. Can you name a few of those?
I can. Let me first say, personally, I'm probably a social conservative, but I don't delve in those areas. Right. I don't try to be all things to all people. A few issues that I really care deeply about that I plan to continue to work on until I'm 6 feet under. So I'm not retiring. I'm simply redirecting my focus. Yeah. One thing is certainly I do believe in freedom in all areas of our lives. And I'm an enormous school choice advocate. Right. I believe that public education truly is the foundation for which people will either succeed or fail. And we've seen it time and time again that We do seem to think more money being thrown into education is going to make it better. And I think we need to empower parents and students with the ability to determine where the kids are going to go to school. And I think only then will schools reform to the point where they will actually be doing a better job for our kids, for all kids.
Yeah.
And so school choice is an enormous issue to me. And I believe in the education savings account because I believe it's not government's money, it's our money. And that parents should have those dollars and the ability to choose the school or the education environment where they believe their children will have the greatest opportunity to learn and to learn safely. I believe safety is an enormous issue in schools now. So school choice is one. Another truly has to do with transparency in government. I think that we've made tremendous strides in Texas in transparency. I mean, I'm one of those people that remembers before all the hearings were televised and before we could go online and see just where a bill was. You had to purchase a service, Gallery Watch or someone, to be able to follow the legislative sessions in the legislation. So I'm excited to see that Texas has done so well in transparency. But I now go back to where I started, I guess, that local governments, I believe, are more disingenuous and less sharing of information. And I am certainly not popular with Texas Association of School Boards, Texas Municipal League, and Texas Association of Counties. They have accused me of all kinds of things. The Texas Association of Counties one time did one of their magazines, just an expose on me and then Citizens for a Sound Economy and what we were trying to do to undermine them.
Wow.
Which I thought was pretty funny. Thank you so much for the free publicity and for making it clear that we were making a difference. So I do believe that ending taxpayer-funded lobbying is an enormous issue. It will change the landscape of what policies are discussed, what policies are passed. I think we wouldn't have ended up with Obamacare if we had prohibited tax dollars being used to lobby for it. And here we fund, AARP, we have so much funding to Planned Parenthood, but we also, in local governments, hire lobbyists who would appreciate me not talking about that, but they hire lobbyists then who lobby and are at least once again removed from the taxpayers who are paying those salaries. So I'm on a mission.
Yeah.
I'm an old gal on a mission to end taxpayer-funded lobbying. And I'm excited that we have some success in some states. I've testified in Kansas, and they're at least now have more transparency. And I think that's the first step toward we expose it, and then people can be appropriately outraged and determine if they want to eliminate it or not, which most people I talk to are pretty outraged when I first started talking about it. So I think there are some things I want to see happen. For me, it's all about transparency and liberty. How can we participate in the process if we aren't given the information? If we don't know, too many people vote on bond initiatives and think of a bond as, it's an investment in the future, not realizing they're raising their property taxes. They're raising taxes and paying attention to where that money is going. I also just got back from my vacation in Pensacola, Florida, and I never take a vacation without looking around at what's going on with local governments there. And so I took pictures of this high school stadium and of the high schools there, and they had something called a smart building program. So they don't have Taj Mahal high schools where you walk in and there are atriums and curved block, curving walkways throughout the facility. They're much more red meat, much more basic.
Just all muscle and bone.
They are.
Yeah.
And to look at the football stadium, it reminded me of Odessa Permian back when I went to school there many years ago. And yet they have a great football team. So it's kind of amazing to me that we seem to be in an arms war regarding our football stadiums in Texas, with each school district wanting to say mine is bigger than yours.
Right.
And I really want to remind people that what really happens in schools happens between a teacher and a student, that is most important. And we need to be paying our best teachers more and perhaps spending less on the facilities.
Well, it's interesting, here in Austin, our children have gone to Austin High, and our son is entering the football program there. And it's interesting because it's not a property-rich district according to whatever definitions you have, but it's interesting that Coach Rosenthal, who's in this arms race, has basically been put in the position of also being a fundraiser,
right,
to the point where they've had to raise resources to replace the ventilation in the boys' locker rooms so that they could reduce the incidence of, the possibility of MRSA infections,
right,
because this antiquated building had bad ducting, and the district wouldn't pay for it. And he said, this needs to happen. So he raised the funds to make it happen. So it is fascinating to watch that. There's a part of you that wishes it's like, why can't they just do this? But at the same, to your point, I wonder if sometimes, the districts that have less, are forced to be innovative in ways that maybe some districts that have or will spend more, maybe
now this
don't.
is AISD.
Correct.
But, it's actually a property wealthy district and sending money elsewhere. So you look at it and say, number one, I think we do need to fix our school finance system. And I think that's going to be a priority this legislative session. After this Supreme Court ruling, I think legislators will be eager to look for ways to reduce the dependency on property taxes, or at least find ways to be more efficient in how they are dispersing the dollars. And I think the one disappointment I had in that ruling was that they didn't really take into consideration the intervener that was focused on the efficiency aspect, because the Constitution also calls for an efficient system of efficient free public schools. And efficiency, I think, really means that we do more with less, or how are those dollars used to better impact the results and student performance. So I think we need to take another whole look at that when you look at what superintendents are paid, what some of the facilities that we are building look like around the state. And some of the schools that are getting those Robin Hood dollars have tremendous facilities. They don't have need for all those dollars. So I think we really need to look at how we are funding schools. I, again, personally believe that in Education Savings Account, if we fund each child X amount, and that would vary based on whether or not we're funding them. There are various funding models, as you know, based on the child. And I think that if we were able to give those dollars to the parent, let the parent make those decisions, I think then the schools would be much more efficient in how they spend those dollars. So no coach or no teacher should have to be out raising money to get supplies or to get their facility updated so it is safe. And yet we see that happening in some school districts, unfortunately.
Yeah. So you are a person who has been in the battles. I mean, in your role, with Americans for Prosperity, for example. I mean, you stake out a position, and you are a voice, and whether or not you're getting bricks through your windows these days, there's still that pushback.
You bet there is. I figure if everybody likes you, you haven't done something right. So you earn your enemies, and I'm proud of the enemies that I've earned. I suppose I would say that. And yet the truth is, I will disagree with people and disagree agreeably. And if they are honest and forthright, let's face it, there are various positions people take that have great validity. I will just fight long and hard for mine. And having said that, I'm so impressed with the citizens who are willing to do that too. I had the great fortune of being able to get up every morning and being paid to do something I wanted to do. And now that I've left Americans for Prosperity, I still get to get up every morning and do what I love to do. I'm still working on school choice. I'm still working on issues that I care about. And come this fall, I'll be engaged again, getting ready for legislative session. But I am, I think, more impressed as I've traveled the state, talking to groups and talking to citizens about just how much people care about the state and care about their country. And they also care about their pocketbooks. And they do watch what local government is spending. So we started the Red Apple Project. Eliza Vioma was very engaged in that. And we started the Red Apple Project as a way to talk about and share information that's publicly available, whether it's through the National Center for Education Statistics or the Texas Education Agency website, or the comptroller's website. There's a lot of data out there, but it's hard for people to, working families and parents who are so busy, they don't have time to go through and pull the data and look for that. So we did it for them. And that's one of the things that I really enjoyed doing, and I'm eager to see that continue. And for parents to have more information, not less, so that people can make better informed decisions and not simply vote very much in the dark, as I think they often do.
Yeah. One of the things one hears from time to time is that, as our country gets more and more kind of digitally connected, they are further and further disengaged from actual involvement and actual advocacy and actual, in those conversations that would lead to positive change. Do you see that, or?
I see it as just the opposite. Now, I think of an activist as someone who is willing to take their personal time and show up or make a call, whether it's go door to door for a candidate or an issue, as AFP does for issues, or whether they will call their legislator or show up at city council meetings or school board meetings. I think that with the new digital age, people have so much more access to information. It's easier for them to follow issues, for us to communicate with them. I mean, let's face it, I was a bit of a relic. I still remember when we would communicate with our Citizens for a Sound Economy activists via fax.
Yes.
We would say we're blast faxing.
Yeah.
Do that backward. Blast faxing.
Yeah.
Which, of course, the technical people were going, no, it's not. But that's what we thought of it as. So when we started emailing, and now, my gosh, we have Twitter, we have Facebook, and I'm constantly impressed with what people are posting and sharing, and their insights and their perceptions on whether it's watching the National Convention, which I'm a bit of a convention nerd. I've been to 7 or 8, and I was director of one of them. So I care about conventions, and I think they have a place. And it's been fascinating to watch the Twitter and the social media buzz around some of the speakers. So I see people more engaged, but it's not everyone. There's certainly different levels of engagement. Some people don't vote, and other folks will vote, but often say, I don't know anything about down ballot. So I think that the effort really is to make sure that folks, the information that they may want and need is available to them, whether they choose to use it or not.
Absolutely.
Their decision.
As our eyes turn towards the legislative session that starts in January of 17, you made reference to the fact that, obviously the school financing system is probably going to, they're going to lift the hood on that. Is that the biggest thing in play right now, or what are some of your other things that you expect to see?
I think it is a big thing in play, and I think along with that will be school choice. I think, again, education savings accounts are really an answer to how to address the equity and the adequacy as well as efficiency issues surrounding school funding. So I think school funding will be really important. Certainly we've heard a lot of talk about and move toward elimination of the franchise tax. I'm old enough to remember back when we modified it in order to give the 1/3 property tax cut for school property taxpayers, which local governments just ate up immediately. So we created this tax, which has been cumbersome and difficult, and to solve a problem that didn't get solved. We just made government bigger by virtue of it. So I'm anticipating, as they have continued to raise the floor on the margin or franchise tax, that the effort will be made if the finances are there to attempt to move toward phasing it out and eliminating it. So I think that will be another issue, certainly. There will be a lot of other issues that will be rising to the forefront. And we always see surprise issues. It seems like every legislative session, you think you know what's going to happen, and then something pops up. So I think I'll be looking at that too. What are the surprises that we'll be seeing? And some of it we can tell based on what candidates are campaigning on. But more, sometimes we're still always surprised. So I think it's going to be fascinating to see what pops up. But I'm still focused on those two issues that I continue to talk about, school choice and empowering parents, and then really empowering taxpayers by eliminating the taxpayer-funded lobbying. We spend far too much money lobbying ourselves when we elect people that should be doing it for us, representing us.
Yeah. So as you look over kind of the span of your career, and again, engagement at the national and state level, what are the victories for you? What are the moments? And that doesn't have to be necessarily the passage of a bill. I mean, what are those moments that you cherish in that whole process as you've experienced them over the years?
Well, I think they're actually smaller victories. It's kind of interesting. It used to be the Republican Party didn't have school choice even in the party platform here in Texas. And so my goal and objective was to get it in the party platforms. So we worked through each of the parties. The Democrats don't have it in their platform, but not only has the Republican Party had it in their platform, but I saw it as a victory when I hear Ted Cruz talk about it, and even previous RNC chairman at the convention talked about it, and to hear even Trump talk about it. But it was an issue.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people have been working on that issue for a long time. So I won't say anything is a personal victory.
Right.
I think it's a victory for all of the individuals and the grassroots that have worked so hard for those issues over the years. I'm excited when I get a phone call from a legislator in another state saying, I've seen your name and I know you're all over this issue of taxpayer-funded lobbying. Will you come and testify at our committee, or will you help us draft legislation? And now I'm excited to see the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, considering proposing legislation on taxpayer-funded lobbying. So I think that some things, maybe they're coming of age now.
Yeah.
It takes a little time for some of these issues to ripen. But Texas is one of the minority of states that don't have private school choice. And we've seen so many programs, 60-something programs across the country in 26 states, and Texas has none. I think the time is right for Texas. So I'm eager to see some of those things come to fruition. It was, of course, one of my greatest opportunities and privileges was to serve in the Reagan administration and to I really wasn't eager to go to the Republican National Committee at that time because I thought all the actions in the administration. But I did get to go and serve as chairman of the 84 renomination convention of Ronald Reagan, and I was excited that that the arrangements committee, I was helped staff it but didn't have a vote in it, chose that it be in Dallas. So that's when Trammell Crow built the tower to the Anatole Hotel because he wanted both the president and vice president there. And the Secret Service said, oh, you can't have them both at the same hotel. So Trammell Crow brilliantly said, well, what if I have a separate registration desk? And they said, well, then it would be 2 hotels.
Wow.
So it's really, under one roof, so to speak, connected. But it was fun to see all those things happen. And to be kind of a part of watching history in action. And I love being behind the scenes doing just that.
So one of the things, too, is, the whole idea that, in many respects, as you've gone through your career, our culture has changed. Right. And so, but there are those who would say that politics, for example, is still a largely male-dominated undertaking. But I think that's changing. Right. But how would you reflect upon that? Like, as a woman who has really kind of cut her own path, through politics in these different places, have you had to make special considerations to be heard, make special considerations for your ideas to be accepted? I mean, has it ever been an issue for you? Because some people talk about women in business, women in politics, but has that been, a part of your thought process and part of your success?
Andrew, I have an interesting perspective on that. I think that women have much more say in politics than most people realize. I think women realize it. I think many women are simply too smart to run for office or feel like, I don't want to be, why do I want to work for thousands of people, when women can have a lot of influence. And so I've never seen that as an issue. But then again, I would never vote for a candidate because they're male or female. I want to know, what do they plan to do to or for us? Right. And do I agree with that? And that's how I think most people who vote based on any kind of principles would look at it. Some people vote based on somebody being a nice guy, but, that's not really how we get things done.
Right.
So I think women have every opportunity. And I know Kay Bailey Hutchison was seen as kind of she struck her path in Texas and started then the Texas Women's Alliance, which I later was president of the Texas Women's Alliance when we were all kind of scratching our heads and saying, well, women really aren't just licking stamps. Who licks stamps anymore?
Right.
But women really aren't just working behind the scenes. Women are engaged. And I think that whether it's male or female, I think women are influencing public policy more than some might think. If you just look at the numbers, how many are in office? I was asked at one time if I wanted to run for office, and I thought, why would I want to run for office?
Right.
I think it's much like when I left Washington. I had worked in the administration for all those years and thought, I was so frustrated. It seemed like you beat your head against the wall, and there's so many bureaucrats that are fighting against what the president or what the secretary of whatever department I was in wanted to see done. And I thought the real power has to be outside, not inside. And that's why it was such a godsend when I was given the opportunity to serve as the first director of Citizens for a Sound Economy in Texas, because I thought it really are the citizens and the voters that drive public policy. And I think it's proven to be the case that I'm excited about so many of the great legislators and leaders that we have in Texas today and have been asked to and endorsed some of them. And just excited to see that we have the opportunity to keep Texas a strong economy and a vibrant one and still give parents and citizens the greater opportunity to participate, not just in government, but to make decisions that affect their families.
So if somebody's listening and they are not necessarily engaged in the political process at some level, but they also have this sense of there's something they would like to have changed, whether it's their child's school situation or, the local pensions, things like that. What's your advice to people to how to get involved, how to get started?
I have to say government goes to those who show up. You have to show up. And when people complain about something but haven't talked to their school board members or haven't shown up at a meeting, frustrating as it may be, to go to those meetings and try to make any points. And I'll be the first to say it's very frustrating. And I doubt that Round Rock School Board is really excited to see me walk in and sign up to speak. But the fact is, you first have to stake your ground. You have to talk to folks. And complaining falls on deaf ears with me if they're not willing to roll up their sleeves and do something. I will help, but I want to see some participation on their part. But a lot of people, I think, are kind of scratching their heads and feeling like it's so overwhelming that they can't impact change. But the truth is, every individual can. And that's the one thing that I've really learned from Americans for Prosperity and its predecessor, is that when people get engaged, change happens. And I'm so impressed with so many people who have rolled up their sleeves and gotten involved and just willing to talk to their legislator, to talk to their city council member. You don't burn up influence, you build it. When you are engaged in a meaningful way, when you show up for meetings, when you ask questions, learn more about the issues. And we can't be experts on everything, but on the issues that are important to you and your family and to your life and your pocketbook at that time, we certainly can. And I have lots of people call me and just ask, how can I make a difference? And I'm excited to see people wanting to and willing to. But too many people complain and don't do anything.
Right. So you mentioned earlier that, you don't see these things as personal victories, but, there is that whole idea of, as you devote yourself to causes and you devote yourself to purposes, that intrinsic motivation a lot of times has to do with, the reason you were put on this earth and the work you were put here to do. How do you feel you're doing on the work you were put here to do?
Oh, that's a great question. That is a great question. I think that the jury's still out. I haven't accomplished all I want to yet. Just as a point of personal reference, my sister is on hospice now. And so I've really taken some time off to spend more time with her while I have that time. And she never married, no children. And so it's really important to me to do that. But it also reminds me just how fleeting our time is here on earth and one of the reasons I've decided to focus on a few issues that I truly care about. Not that I plan to retire, because I will probably be working the day I die.
Sure.
If I'm going to stay happy, I'm going to be working. But I think the jury's still out. I feel like I've accomplished things. I hope that I have a reputation, that I am an honest broker, that I will be straightforward and well informed about what I'm talking about. But I'm certainly not interested in myself,
Right.
but in accomplishing things that I think will help my daughter and future generations. And I think we were blessed, my generation was. We were blessed to have been raised by the greatest generation. And here I feel the responsibility to pass that on, to make sure that my daughter and future grandchildren have the same opportunities that I had. So it's a joy to be able to work, but it's also, I think, a responsibility.
So how can people keep tabs on what you're doing? As you're out there still swinging your sword, standing up for what you believe in, are you?
Yeah, thank you. Well, right now I'm actually going to be testifying middle of August, and I've been invited to testify on a piece of legislation, so I'm still engaged. Come fall, I will be really participating and I'll have a blog up that I've written some pieces for Peggy at peggyvenable.com. But I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I just know that the right door will open for me to be able to do it when I'm ready. I'm just taking a little breather right now, but still doing the working group on an education savings account and still keeping my hands in things.
Yeah, I don't suspect you're ever going to ever just shut it down. I have I said you may catch the occasional breather, here and there, but I have a feeling you're going to be fighting the good fight.
It's the first time I've really done this since I left college. I even worked my way through college. So it has been really an incredible opportunity and a blessing for me to have this summer to be able to spend some time with my sister and kind of reassess where I want to be, what I want to do with the remaining years I'm going to be working. So it's fun and exciting, and I don't know just where I'm going to end up, but I'll be engaged.
Awesome. Well, that's what we've come to expect from you. So that's good stuff.
Thank you.
You bet. Well, thank you for your time, Peggy. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
You bet.
I enjoy your podcast.
Thank you.